In the 19th century, a light rail from the Monroe Sawmill was built to take timber to the Queensland rail line at Hampton. It ran from the Bunker's Hill Mill near the present Somerset region boundary via the Palm Tree Mill to the rail station at Hampton. In the final decades of the 19th century, there were dozens of small sawmills scattered throughout the district. Literally thousands of super feet of timber were cut. Many families depended on the timber industry. Locating, logging and milling the timber was labour-intensive. Getting it to market by bullock team was time-consuming and costly. So without any state assistance, they built their own railway system. A simple affair, hauled by bullock or horses, pulling the timber along rails running along road casement to a mill at Palm Tree. All construction work was done by pick and shovel, and the timber rails were soon replaced with the second-hand steel tracks. It was such a success, Duncan Munro soon went to USA to purchase a Shay locomotive. This experiment in rail transport made a great contribution to the local community right up to its final closing down. It provided transport, but it was the nucleus of a community. Intrigued by the story of the old railway track, Noel Eberhardt decided to use his expert skills to build a replica in small size of the Munro Shay, displayed this year at the HAMPTON Festival. You can walk along part of the old right-of-way at the western end of Palm Tree Road. The occasional dog spite, a sleep and a sleeper are still visible.
This locomotive is a scale model of the two-cylinder two-truck shays that ran on the Hampton tram owned by A&D Munro that ran from 1906 to about 1936. Hampton is north of Toowoomba and on the Crow's Nest Road, and the mill sites were all lower in elevation than Hampton, so the trains pulled their loads up to Hampton and then switched them onto QR. This model took about 9 years to build during the last years I was working, and I had no scale model plans, so it was all scaled from the original works drawings, which date from about 1890 and are still available. No castings were available, so the only commercial parts on this model were the gears, which were commercial gears, but everything else was machined or fabricated from solid. The main problems were mental. That is, getting your head around how you were going to machine some of the components. In those days, I'd only just taught myself to use the lathe, so it did take a while to sort out some of the problems, and some parts had to be made many times before they were finally installed.
Would you like to point out any special features of the train?
The special features of Shay's was that they had the boiler offset to the left side. The cylinders and the engine was hanging off the right side of the boiler, and it drove all the wheels on both trucks through long drive shaft with universal joints and sliding joints. This enabled it to go around a really sharp bends and tolerate really uneven track. These locos were built to run on either wooden or steel rails, and in fact some of them actually ran on round logs with special wheels that had hemispherical sort of treads. There was no real problems, it just took time. I was never sure that it was going to run the first time I ran it. I got quite a surprise when it actually worked, but it's been a very reliable loco. It's now 26 years old, and
you pull people with it, don't you?
Yes, yeah, I do use it as a passenger hauling train. So, and it pulls about 3 to 4 adults comfortably on the reasonably level track. When they worked in the bush, of course, they worked on very steep grades. I think on the Monroe tram, the steepest grade was about 1 in 8, which is extremely severe. I selected it to build because it had a normal parallel round top boiler. I was a bit tempted to build one of the lay shays which ran down in Canungra, but the only two-cylinder shay they had a T-shaped boiler, which isn't allowable under the model code, so this is the one it had to be. And hopefully it'll go on for many years yet.
Thank you very much. Very one.
Right. Shays were invented in the United States by a man up near the Great Lakes,
and he was involved in the logging industry, and they, at the time, this was in the 1880s about, they didn't have trucks that could drag logs out of the woods, so they decided they'd use locomotives to drag logs out of the woods on railroads. Now these railroads were pretty primitive things. The sleepers were just bits of round logs. Rails were either bits of 4-inch or 6-inch square timber, or they were very light rail, 20 pounds per yard or something like that. And they were just laid on very uneven track beds, so he needed a loco that was very flexible, preferably had all wheels as driving wheels, because any wheel that carries weight but isn't a driver just loses some tractive effort. And it had to be easy to maintain, so he put his cylinders and all the working gear on one side sticking out so that the mechanics could find it fairly easy to get at. That's why I was doing nothing. Didn't put this down now. So I'll take that off. So he designed this locomotive that had 2 trucks, which were very like the trucks that the logs were brought out of the forest on, but he had a drive shaft arranged to drive all the wheels through bevel gears, and in that he'd also had to have universal joints and sliding shafts so that the trucks could go round corners and could tip this way and that. And when you look at full-size shows, it's amazing how much movement there is in the trucks. Some of the logging railroads actually didn't have rails at all. They used to use round logs, small ones, up to 6 to 8 inches in diameter, as the rails, and they had wheels that were hemispherical, so they could sit on top of these log roads. So there was a lot of variation, but in all of the shows, in all except one, the boiler was offset to the left and the engine hung on the right side of the boiler. The little shows, like this one, type A shows, only had 2-cylinder engines. The B, C's and D's, the bigger ones, had 3-cylinder engines, so that they gave more smooth power strokes to the drive shaft. They were fairly simple loco. They were built in all sizes from about 7 tons to 160 tons was the biggest one ever built. This one was about 13 tons, so it was one of the smaller ones. This one and its sister worked at HAMPTON north of Toowoomba, and they came out from the US in crates, and they were assembled by the local blacksmith, who then became the driver for the next 13 years because nobody else knew how the damn thing worked anyway. As you can see, all the weight of this loco, the boiler, the water, the tender tank, everything is on these 8 driving wheels, so their traction was pretty good. They could go up grades of about 13%, which is about 1 in 7, or about 1 in 7. And if you're ever on the road and you look at the percentage grades that you see, it's quite amazing when you see these locomotives going up hills like that, because you've got smooth metal wheels on smooth metal rails. At Cass in the United States, the big ones there regularly climb 11% grades with no trouble at all on a full load of passengers. These little ones could only haul a few tons up a grade, and usually the tracks were arranged so that the locomotives pushed the empty cars up the grade and then pulled the loaded trucks down the grade. That for the very reason, and they came down backwards, was to keep the water level in the boiler over the crown sheet of the firebox, because you had to keep water in there all the time. And that fire is officially dead. Boilers are fairly standard on any locomotive. You've got to have something that just boils water, converts it into steam. The very early Shays had vertical boilers, but very soon it was realised they weren't terribly efficient, so they went to a normal locomotive top boiler. The bigger Shays all had wagon top boilers, whereas the boiler diameter over the firebox was much bigger than the boiler diameter up the front. These are wood burning funnels. You'll see them on a lot of locomotives, anything that worked in the cane fields or in the forest areas. And what they were to do was to try and cut down the amount of sparks causing bushfires or trackside fires. In the Shay, the whole funnel design, this was one that Leamy, which is the builder of the Shay, used to use, but there was other designs that were probably even better, but they were sold as a sort of an aftermarket accessory. But in these thing, the smoke from the smoke box here came up this part of the chimney, and it actually hit a curved plate that was suspended at the top of the chimney, so any of the heavy cinders would hit that and fall back down and wouldn't be thrown out on the trackside. And some of them incorporated quite an elaborate mesh network up here to hold back any of the sparks that came out. These were quite often added after market. You will see some that are much bigger than this. They seem to bulge from down here and come up. Others have a spherical sort of part around the middle of the funnel, but they're all designed to just extinguish the sparks before they can cause fire. Now these are universal joints, so they just allow it copes with the angle, but as this swivels out and in, it's longer or shorter, so you've got sliding joints there. Like so, and you've got this at both ends.